big games can often come with asking quarterbacks, hey, how do you feel about playing in big games? Is this the biggest game of your life? How are you feeling? Where's your headspace right now? How do you balance not getting too psyched but also not being too boring about it? I'm Steven, that's Andrew, and that's Stefan. All those questions were asked of Will Howard on Tuesday afternoon as Ohio State prepares to play Oregon, number 3 matchup. Will Howard's a veteran. He's a super senior, as he got reminded plenty of times during this press conference. So he's played some big games before, but Stefan, do you think this is the biggest game of Will Howard's career?
So the more I've been thinking about it, the more I think the answer is yes, right? And I know the immediate argument is going to be the Big 12 championship game he played in, and if that Big 12 championship game was in 2024, I think it would be a little bit more important because you're talking about, automatic playoff bursts and things of that nature. But this is this has been a big season for Will Howard in terms of, hey, you were a really good quarterback at Kansas State. Can you be a great quarterback? Can you be a Heisman finalist? Can you win at Ohio State? Can you be the guy that leads Ohio State back to a national championship? And this is kind of the first test we have of can he be a quarterback for the number 2 team in the country playing in top 5 matchups on the road, right? Can he give a strong performance and play in these environments? Because I think NFL scouts look at these games a lot. How do you handle that? How is that going to translate to how you play in the NFL? So I think for a lot of different reasons, I keep going back to, I think this is the biggest game of Will Howard's career. Now, when we get to November and he's playing at Penn State and he's playing at Michigan or against Michigan and playing in the Big Ten championship game and the college football playoff, I think it's just going to get bigger and bigger in environments and bigger stages for him. But to this point of his career, I think a top 3 matchup in a primetime game at Oregon, huge game in the Big Ten, I think it's the biggest game of his career.
Andrew, I think when you first hear that question, it's easy to go, this dude's played for a trophy before, right? And he won that trophy. And can you ever really put a regular season game over a game where there's a trophy on the line? Is this the scenario where that's the case? Or are you maybe more on, no, he played for a championship and he won that. That's still a bigger game, even if the scenery around this game is bigger.
He played for a championship, and that's the bigger game. That's the most important game of his career at this point. And after Saturday, that'll still be the most important game of his career. Because I think Stefan had a point that I wanted to make for my point, which is this is just his biggest game and most important game until the next one, because it's Oregon. And then in win or lose, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be saying, well, it's Penn State now. And then in a couple of weeks, we're going to say, well, you're not really a Buckeye until you play Michigan. And then they play Michigan, and then they might play Oregon again in a Big Ten championship game. So we're just going to keep going back and forth and going, okay, well, now it's the Penn State game. Okay, well, now it's the Michigan game. And we're just going to keep moving these goalposts. So I still think it's when you play for a championship. When you play for a trophy, that matters. That's a big deal. So, yeah, I think it's the most important game of his career, the Big 12 championship game, that is. I think this is the toughest game of his career. I think that this is the most demanding game of his career. I mean, we talked about this today. The crowd in Autzen Stadium should be very fired up and ready to go. They're talking about this game being the biggest game in their stadium's history. That fan base is going to be ready to go. The media this week, the media circuit's going to be crazy. The hype for this game is crazy. Everything about this game is big. And I'm not talking just this is a top 5 matchup, right? This is a big event, not a sport. This isn't a football game. This is an event. So I think it's the biggest thing that he's done. It's the toughest game that he's played in, but I don't think it's the most important, because the most important is when you play for a trophy. So he will play in a more important game at Ohio State than he did when he was at Kansas State. It's just not right now.
I agree with both of you. Seriously, and I'm
right.
going to come up because both of you were doing this thing where you were alternating between important and biggest.
Yes.
And those are very key distinctions. I think the biggest game of his career is where I agree with Andrew. It's still the game where he was playing for a trophy. I think this is the most important game of Will Howard's career because of everything that is on the table for him and the reason he came here. He was not in a Heisman Trophy conversation by winning the Big 12 championship game. In fact, to your point, it's just kind of, he won the Big 12, but it's the Big 12. It's a good conference, but it's not a national championship, right? And it's also just, if we had to talk about hierarchies with conferences, it's Big 12, it's the SEC, and then it's everybody else kind of get in line behind that. But it is important because, to your point, he was playing for a trophy. But he's playing for a trophy in this game too. What have we seen from every quarterback who was walked away after a big-time win? we have seen them enter the Heisman Trophy conversation for real. Quinn Ewers entered the conversation for real after the Michigan game. Milroe entered the conversation for real after the Georgia game. Miami's quarterback, I don't know what's going on down there with that situation, but apparently they keep turning games that shouldn't be big games into big games, and so now we all think Cam Ward might win the Heisman Trophy this year. Nico Iamaleava, before they lost over this past weekend, his conversation for the Heisman started with the Oklahoma game. This is where it starts. Will Howard has spent 5 weeks building up to this game, and now everybody's watching him, and everybody's watching Dylan Gabriel. One of these two quarterbacks is going to leave Saturday as a Heisman Trophy candidate. Maybe. Maybe, because also Jeremiah Smith exists. Probably, though, just because it's October, and it's easy to just throw it on the quarterbacks, unless you're Boise State. Then you just hand it off, and he goes and gets you 35 million yards. But he's playing for prominence. He's playing for hierarchy. He's playing for April at the NFL draft. Everything for why he is still in college football starts for him on Saturday in Eugene. And I think in this situation, it's okay to allow that to outweigh even when he won a trophy, which is why I agree with you. Winning a trophy, still the biggest thing he's done as a college football player. But setting up what could be the rest of his football life, that's just as important, because that's just as much about him as an individual as it is about any team accomplishment he can do. We'll continue to have this conversation on Buckeye Talk. Well, I will disagree with other things that they say. Go get the text 614-350-3315 and go listen to Buckeye Talk wherever you find podcasts. For the goalpost movers, Andrew, Stefan, and myself, see you later from the goalposts that we moved down the street to Eugene.